Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, children of all ages, welcome to another edition of the Sports Martini. The Sports Martini. Everything in the world of sports. All together in one time and one place. Now, the Sports Martini. With your hosts, Jimmy T and Andy E, Jim Goodman and Andy Everett. Now let me grab my shakers. I gotta go. Well, good afternoon once again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Sports Martinis. I'm Andy Everett.
And I'm Jim Goodman.
We have a special guest today. Mike Lefko joins us from the San Antonio media scene, most recently with KCWX. What are you doing these days, Mike? I forgot to ask you what your next venture is.
I think I'm asking myself that as well. So thanks for having me on, guys. It's been fun. With no sports going on, a lot of us who had been in play-by-play or kind of around the area are kind of waiting to see what's next. And I don't think I'm alone in that. But yeah, I was maybe unlucky enough to be out of a job right before all this hit. So it's been a temporary pause, and I've just tried to get creative without losing my mind on other ventures. So I started writing, I made a website, and this has been great too. So I've just tried to stay in the sports vein as much as possible.
Well, Jim, I know what you've been doing because we need to congratulate you. You're now the new athletic director at Sul Ross State out in Alpine, Texas. So congratulations on that. And when are you moving west?
Yeah, well, I'm not in Alpine right now. I'm still in San Antonio. And, a lot of people that know Texas, know West Texas, they think Alpine, the Big Bend, it's kind of isolated. But right now, with everything the way it is, I'm going to be working remotely from my house in San Antonio until the end of August when the campus opens up. So if you think you're isolated living in Big Bend, think how I feel now. I can't even walk out of my house and talk to people that I'm going to be working with. But I was really kind of interesting the way it happened. I'll give you the short version of it. I had a conversation with my wife about, we're empty nesters now. Our oldest son's in the Navy, our youngest son's going to North Texas and Denton, and it's just us now. And we were talking about, okay, what do we want to do from here on out? What do we want life to be? And she's a longtime educator, and one of the things that was a common theme to that conversation was that we wanted to be somewhere, we wanted to be involved in something where we really felt we could make an impact in young people's lives. And I know that sounds corny when you say it out loud, but I'm a corny guy, so I don't mind saying it. So not too long after that conversation, I got a phone call from Larry Hill, the head football coach at Smithson Valley High School. And Larry was really good friends with Brad Parrott, who I worked with at UTSA very closely. And he said, Jim, we're going to hire our first full-time athletic director at Sul Ross. And he played quarterback on the football team there years ago, was very successful. And he said, we think, I'd like to submit your name if you have an interest. And I knew about Sul Ross. I mean, it's a school over 100 years old, and I'd been to Alpine a number of times. And I said, Larry, let me think about it. It kind of hit me cold. But the more I looked into it and the more I studied it, it just felt right. And fortunately, the president of the school had enough confidence in me to offer me the position. So May 16th, I take over as the athletic director of the Low-Grow program out at Sul Ross. Very excited about it. But I want to jump back to Mike, and thank you by bringing it up, by the way. I want to jump back to Mike for a second, because Mike and I worked together for a while, and I produced those UTSA football games and other football games that Mike did play-by-play on, also some basketball games. Mike, you're a relatively young guy, but you're a pro behind the mic. Like Andy is as well. I'm the guy on the edges. You guys are right there. And I always thought that you were, really good doing that kind of work. And I know here pretty soon, when we all kind of get back to some kind of normal, you'll be back behind the mic again. But it's really nice to have you on here today. And Andy, if you don't mind, I'd kind of like to bypass what sports is going through right now, because if Mike's got a cut, and this has got to be true to sports martinis, if Mike's got a story or two about something that's happened in his career, we're all about those kind of stories. You got anything for us, Mike?
Oh, well, I mean, in the vein of appropriateness, I don't know. I'm sure I do, but
Podcast, you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff.
that's true.
These are censors, so.
I mean, travel stories are always fun. I think getting into sports is always fun. This is kind of early on career-wise. It's just when we were seniors in college, about to graduate, there were 12 of us, like kind of a senior class trip of our radio station, and we went down to Georgetown. We went to Syracuse. So we went down to Georgetown, and just a bunch of future broadcast professionals. A lot of guys who are now very successful in the industry. Our last chance to be fans, because you don't get to be a fan much. I know Andy can probably attest to that, and Jim as well. When you're an administrator, you don't get to be a fan as much. So that was kind of our last hurrah. And maybe under the influence of a few alcoholic beverages, maybe just because it's a fierce Syracuse-Georgetown rivalry. But we absolutely ridiculed every Georgetown fan in sight, and Syracuse happened to win in dominant fashion. So I think that's why we love sports to some extent, and that was just my last kind of fun memory before we all transitioned into the working world.
But then you had to become
Mike, tell me about Syracuse, because that is a renowned broadcasting school. The who's who of broadcasters have all gone there, from Marv Albert to Bob Costas to some of the young guys, Mike Tirico. What was that experience like there, learning from those people who have put so many people into our business?
Well, I was talking with some of my friends the other day from there, and I think we all came up with a theory that the reason it's such a good broadcasting school is because it's freezing cold. You never want to go outside in the winter. It snows 150 inches a year, and so there's nothing else to do but focus on your career. And that was one big aspect. Honestly, there weren't many distractions. It wasn't 70 degrees every day. There was nothing to do outside. But it's also, like some of the alums you mentioned, Andy, they invest so much in giving back to the program. At that student radio station I was talking about, there are professional quality studios donated with names that say Bob Costas and Marv Albert and Mike Tirico. And they come back to college every single year and give speeches to these students. And then because people like myself or anyone else growing up, they hear about those things, it just kind of fosters a sense of communal rivalry and bond that every single person going there is that focus. And you're with similarly talented people. So I think you grow from that interaction. But mainly the snow thing.
Yeah, the snow thing would get me to stay inside too. That would keep me inside more than coronavirus would. So I don't do cold very well. I want to bring up something that you mentioned, and I think all three of us can kind of touch on this. I think when you get into this business that we're in, the business of broadcasting sports, talking about sports, covering sports events, we do lose some of our fandom. I'm still a sports fan to a certain extent, but I'm not a big fan of going to games that I'm not working. I go to 40 basketball games a year with UTSA and 12 football games, sometimes more if they get into the to the tournament or the championship game or a bowl game. And in your case, you cover Spurs games, and I have two in the past. The only kind of the last bastion of fandom for me is baseball. I still like going to the ballpark, and maybe it's because I don't do very much baseball broadcasting, but I think that you kind of get jaded. I'm at a football game 5 hours before kickoff. I don't leave until an hour and a half after everybody else has left. And so getting ready the next day to say, hey, do you want to go to the Spurs game or do you want to go do that? I'm like, not really. And I think a lot of times we forget that. I still am a fan of watching certain things on TV, watching golf, watching baseball, going to baseball, listening to baseball. But I think that this business does kind of jade you a little bit.
Yeah, I can go on that if you want. I think I definitely agree because, and I found it as well, Andy, covering basketball a lot here or football. I can't just sit then at a basketball game. Baseball, there is something different. You're outside. It's a great day. It's a chance to kind of escape everything. But I found myself at a basketball game recently, and it was just off-putting. It was very strange. I was sitting there and I wanted information. I didn't know the starters. I didn't know any background. And I felt, instead of relaxing, I felt nervous because I didn't have any info on who that shooting guard was. I mean, we're used to calling a game and you have all the stats and all the info on this guy. And I wanted to know where he was from, how many points he had and all that. And I couldn't just relax and sit and enjoy it. That's one aspect that's been very different.
Yeah, I've had similar, what I did a lot of times, and I'll go back to when I started many years ago with the Spurs. The work that I did, the jobs that I had with different teams and UTSA, I didn't get to see much of the games. It's all the other stuff going on that the fans don't need to know about or see, because as a fan, you just show up, you see a game. Well, there's a lot of work that goes on to putting that event on. And when you get to the stadium events like a college football game, and I've worked on Super Bowls or whatever, I mean, those things are massive productions, but the sheer size of the building, it's really difficult to make sure that you have everything buttoned up. On UTSA game days for the first 4 seasons, I arrived at the Alamo Dome for home games at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I was the last guy out of the building other than the guy turning off the Alamo Dome lights. And you catch bits and pieces of the game. And so when I go to an event that I try to go as a fan, I feel like I'm at work, and I'm like you, Mike, where you felt it was off-putting. I'm sitting there going like, hey, who's this player? What's his stats? I'm looking about the staff of the building. Why are they doing this? Why did they do that? Why are they putting the security people over here? And that's not fun. That's like going to work and watching yourself work.
Well, I went to a baseball game in Seattle 5 or 6 years ago. I was there for a San Antonio Stars trip. My wife came up for the trip. We got tickets to a baseball game, and there was a moment of silence with us sitting next to each other. And she said, "Are you calling this game in your head?" And my answer was, "Yes, I am." And she says, "Why can't you just sit here and relax and watch the game?" And I said, "I am." And she said, "No, you're not. You've got 1,000 things going through your head." I said, "That's how I do a game. That's how I do it." And she said, "What is there to see other than pitcher, batter, and catcher?" And I went, "Runners on first. Who's going to cover second? Center fielder shaded 3 steps to left field. Right fielder's over here. This guy's over here. The umpire's position there. The third base coach is going through the signals." She's like, that would be chaos to her, but it's natural to me.
Right. Many years ago, my wife worked in the NBA with the Seattle Supersonics for a number of years, and she worked in professional hockey. And she was actually the assistant athletic director at Seattle Pacific University for a while. So she's got a sports background. And one of the things that happened when we got married was she, at one point, said, "For every sporting event that you drag me to, you have to reciprocate and take me to a concert, a play, some kind of," and I am so far behind.
You'll never catch up.
You'll never catch up. Yeah. But, Andy, you may not want to let your wife know that, because she may try to make you do that. And Mike, you need to keep that whenever you get married to.
Will do.
Yeah. I'll never catch up. Never.
All right. Now, one of the things that has got the attention of everybody right now is the Last Dance documentary that ESPN is showing. The ratings are off the charts. That shows us how much we are hungered for new content and eventually live sports, which we'll talk about in a second. But as they chronicle the Bulls' run, the 6 championships, the last one in the 1997-98 season, and most importantly, the career of Michael Jordan for the generation that didn't get to see him play. What are your thoughts on that? I'll give you a couple of quick thoughts to begin with. I've always looked at Michael as the best player in my generation of watching games at his position. I think that in the 70s game, the center was so much more dominant, and that's why Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was such an important part of basketball history that I think often gets overlooked, because since the Magic, Bird, Jordan era forward, the center really hasn't had that big of a role compared to what it used to have. The biggest guy on the floor used to be the most important player, and that's why I give Kareem credit. He played for over 20 years. The thought is, though, that I look at sports from a competitive angle. And one of the things that always made me like the way that Kobe Bryant played was that he was the most competitive player. And I've heard Phil Jackson talk about many times that Michael and Kobe were similar, except Michael took it off the court. As soon as the game was over, Kobe didn't want to compete with you. Whereas Michael, and as it was documented in one of the episodes, he was playing for $1,000 a hand in a card game in the back of the plane. And as soon as he was done cleaning out their money, he would go hang out with John Paxson and Will Perdue and play for $1 a hand. And their question was, well, why do you want to play with us when you just won $10,000? You're only going to win $10 here. He said, I don't care. I just want your money in my pocket. And I can certainly relate to that on the golf course. When I play and we have games here and there, I may be playing my best friend. And if he gives me $2 after the round, that's a championship trophy. That's the thrill of the competition, whether it's 2 or 20 or 200 or 2,000. It's just the fact that I have your money in my pocket for this amount of time, and tomorrow I may have to give it back to you. And so I can relate to that to a certain extent, but I got another Michael Jordan story to share after you guys give me some thoughts on what you've seen so far on The Last Dance.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Well, to that point, I love the quarters scene too with his security guard. And that guy became famous for his little shrug, but that's the competitiveness. And I think the one aspect that I wish we would see more of, and maybe we will in the 4 hours remaining, are some of those behind the scenes locker room type things, because I don't want to criticize this. It's under so much scrutiny. It's been terrific. It's been a fantastic documentary, but the title of The Last Dance really made it seem like it was just going to be an all access behind the scenes event on that final season. And for someone who still remembers that very well, I love all the people talking. I love all that. I would really, really enjoy some more behind the scenes little quips from Jordan, or little intimate moments like that, playing quarters with his security guys because of that competitive streak. He just could not lose, instead of all this backstory that they have dredged up, which it's still great to hear of that perspective. But because it's such a recent era, and I think we all follow the NBA, we all know it so well, the only minor critique, not even a criticism, just a minor critique I'd have is just, let's give us some more behind the scenes on that current final season. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that because it's pretty much immune from criticism at this point, it seems like.
I agree. I'd like to see more of that too.
Well, I'll criticize it to a degree. I mean, I think it's great. I really do. And I agree with you, Mike. I would love to see more behind the scenes stuff. And I do think it was kind of promoted that way. It would be interesting to see the stuff that was shot that we don't see in this documentary, because that's probably what you're talking about. And you're talking about, most people consider Michael Jordan the greatest basketball player that's ever played. And you could argue that, sure. I don't like comparing players of different eras because I think that's unfair. Because if you want to try to talk about the greatest player in the world that's ever played in the NBA, it would be difficult to keep some guys out of that conversation, especially when you start looking at statistics. Andy mentioned Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, great player. One guy that for some reason people don't seem to remember or talk about anymore, and he's passed away, but you look at the NBA record book and his name's all over the place, a guy named Wilt Chamberlain. And a lot of people don't realize that when he left college, when he left Kansas, he couldn't go directly to the NBA, so he went to the Harlem Globetrotters and played for a year. He was their point guard. And, here's a guy that's 7'1". If you've ever seen the film of that, the guy was just amazing. But what people remember is the big guy that they just put on the low block, and he would, power everybody. But getting back to Michael Jordan, I've got a Michael Jordan story from the NBA All-Star game that was played. I want to say it was in Chicago, and it was right after he signed that big contract with Nike. And I was helping the league office with the slam dunk contest. And so I'm out on the floor, guys are coming out warming up. There's a guy that worked for the NBA league office, I can't remember his name now. Good guy. He comes over to me. He goes, "Hey, Jim, do me a favor." I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Michael Jordan just came out of the locker room. And he's wearing a Nike warm-up because he needs to wear a Chicago Bulls warm-up. Go tell him to go in the locker room and change." So I take about 3 steps, and I stop and turn back around. I said, "Do you really think I'm the right guy to do this?" And he goes, "Yeah, you can handle it. It's fine." So I walk up to Jordan, and I said, "Hey, Michael," I introduced myself to him. I said, "The NBA sent me over here to say they need you to go back in the locker room take the Nike warm-up off and put your Chicago Bulls warm-up on. And he looks at me and gets that $1 million smile on his face, and he goes, I wondered if anybody was going to say something about that. Turned around, went in the locker room, came back on with the Chicago Bulls stuff. And, I'm thinking, I can't believe he did that. And about 2 minutes after that, this same guy comes over to me and says, hey, Jim, there's some guys sitting on the bench over there that you got to run off. They can't be there. We don't have enough seats for them. And I look over, and one of the guys is Moses Malone. And I looked at this guy and I said, I took care of Jordan, you take care of Malone, and I walked off. So that was my Michael Jordan story. But it's a tremendous, just what we've seen. And I think I'm 1 or 2 episodes behind right now. I think just 1. But what we've seen it doesn't really give me the behind-the-scenes look that I want out of it. But I can't complain about what they've shown. It's pretty interesting. I think about Jerry Krause, because he's portrayed in this, I think, probably unfairly. Granted, he wasn't the most likable guy in the NBA. I really don't think you can discount what he offered up when he was running the Bulls. But they make him out to be this kind of almost like an underworld character in a ruffled suit, with crumbs on his lapels and stuff like that. Crumbs was one of his nicknames that Jordan gave him. And I think that's highly unfair. But I do think he brought a lot on himself. And from my point of view, inside, behind the scenes stuff in that regard, I'd like to see more of that along with the player stuff.
One of the things that I recall, and I didn't even think about it at the time, but the thing that is interesting is that I go back to, I think it was 1992 or 3. I was covering the locker rooms at the Alamo Dome. The Spurs were playing the Bulls. The game is over, and everybody has to wait for Michael. And, of course, he gets his suit and tie on before he talks to anybody. And I happened to be kind of standing off of his right shoulder, and KSAT was shooting its pictures off of his kind of just off to his left. So I was pretty much in the shot of everything Michael Jordan said that day. And so that stuff runs on the 10 o'clock news. It runs in the early morning stuff the next day. It runs at noon. And this is even before Twitter and Facebook and texting and all that. This is just people coming up to me. I probably had 50 people go, man, I can't believe you were standing next to Michael Jordan in the locker room yesterday. And I went, we weren't going out to dinner. I was there for 5 minutes to get whatever he had to say so I could get out of there. And I made a couple $100 on him when I sold his audio to the networks. So, that was the phenomenon that I have. And I think that a lot of people get very starstruck when they're around athletes. And because I've never had a chance to be, I've had to kind of be there. I'm there for a professional reason, and then I'm gone. And so I've never really had that aura about that. But a lot of people were pretty impressed that I was, for all of 5 minutes, sitting next to Michael Jordan in the locker room.
Did you think you were Walter Pasacreta?
No.
He's in every live shot that San Antonio has from the Spurs game.
I just got the audio, called all the networks. They took it. They paid me. End of story.
So kind of dovetailing on what you said there, Andy, and Mike, you too. Is there an athlete that you had the opportunity to meet that you did have that sense of being a fan and kind of being awestruck? Because we've all been around a lot of athletes, and it's kind of like to us, it's kind of like no big deal. But has there ever been that moment where you were like, wow, I'm meeting so-and-so, I'm talking to so-and-so, and who would that be?
Well, I think not since, I started working. Maybe when I was a kid and we were at games, it's from that fan to working perspective. The strange thing, honestly, now, if I'm going to a game, I will look up who the broadcasters are. I get more almost awestruck or more impressed with who is calling the game, because those are guys I aspire to be at the highest level. And so I'm more concerned with who's broadcasting the game. So to that point, a couple years ago, maybe last year, 2 years ago, we went to cover Texas and Kansas basketball, big Monday game. So Jay Billis is there. And that's a guy that he's built such a massive brand and persona for himself. and I had never been in the same arena with him in person. So I had to just kind of wander over there to the announcer's table and introduce myself. But that's not awestruck, but that's more of, I was more impressed that Jay Billis was there than any NBA player or NFL player or anyone that I've really covered.
During the 2003 finals, Western Conference Finals, Brent Musburger was doing ESPN radio. And, you know, the game didn't start till like 8:30, which really meant 9, and nobody was even going on the air till 8. And so we were all back in the media room from about 5:45 to at least 7:30. And I was sitting at a table with 2 or 3 other people, and Brent Musburger just sat down next to us, and it was just a regular conversation. It was like he knew us. There was no being highfalutin or anything. He was down to earth, nicest person in the world, and just told all kinds of stories and jokes and all those kind of things that I'll remember. And I kind of I can dovetail with Mike there with the fact that being around those guys is more real to me than being around athletes. When I was a kid, my favorite athlete was Johnny Bench. I grew up in Oklahoma. He was an outstanding baseball player. I idolized him as a baseball player. And in 1984 or 5, somewhere around in there, he got inducted into the Oklahoma Sports Hall of Fame. I was asked to go cover the event. He was not a very nice person that night. I think he'd had a few too many. He was a little bit belligerent. He was certainly very standoffish. And I had a completely different idea about who he was after that than the idolizing that I had done all my life up to that point, the previous 10 or 12 years. But then when I moved to San Antonio, he was doing one of those media tours. He was pumping some product, and if you talked about his product, then he would do an interview with you about baseball for 10 minutes. And so I had him on the air on a talk show I was doing, and he was the nicest guy in the world. He was friendly. He was telling jokes. I had him on the phone for a couple of minutes before he went on the air. I told him I was from Oklahoma. He was like, "Oh, from where? What high school did you go to?" Nicest person in the world. And the one thing I think it taught me is that athletes are just like everybody else. We have good days and we have bad days. And you might be a jerk on day one, and that's what people remember you by. And for my sake and for his, he got a chance to kind of redeem himself with me, and he did.
Well, I had the luxury, I guess. My dad was a radio and TV broadcaster. He did play-by-play football and basketball for the old Southwest Conference when Mobil Oil and Humble Oil were the big sponsors. And he was like the original John Madden. He wouldn't fly, so he drove everywhere. And a lot of times he would take me with him. So I didn't know any better. I thought every kid was growing up this way. So I'm in, the back rooms of the stadium in Austin before a Longhorns game, and Darrell Royal is playing with my truck with me. And, so I was around people like that growing up. So it never was a big deal to me that, someone was a famous athlete or famous coach. It was no big deal. But I went to a golf tournament one time, a number of years ago, and was standing over by a tree. I actually was able to go I take that back. I had a media pass, but I wasn't working to do anything. And Arnold Palmer walked up, and I'd never been close to him before, and I couldn't believe the crowd of people that came over to where he was. And I was probably 6 feet away from him. And the guy commanded the space that he was in. And he made everybody that was in a radius that could see him feel like he was talking just to them. And there was a little bit of a sense of awe, like, man, this guy is, whatever it is, this guy has it. And the only other time I've really had that feeling was when it was my first year with the Spurs, working for the Spurs. And I walk into the Spurs press room, which was underneath the stands at the old Hemisphere Arena. It was not the nicest press room that you could think of. And I walked in, it was a couple hours before the game, and there was a guy sitting there. And I looked over, and Jerry West. And so I told the guy that was the PR guy at the Spurs right there, I said, "Hey, that's Jerry West over there." He goes, "Yeah." And I said, "No, you don't understand. That is Jerry West. And when I grew up, he was my idol." And he goes, "Well, go talk to him. He's a really nice guy." And I said, I can't go talk to Jerry. What, me? Talk to Jerry West? So he takes me over and introduces me. So spent some time. I said, "Well, Mr. West has been, it's been nice, but I got to go to work." And he goes, oh, okay. And I'm walking out and he goes, hey, Jim, because when the game's over and you're done, find me and find a photographer and we'll get a picture together. And so I was like, oh, okay, that's great. Well, after the game's over, I wasn't thinking about it. I was doing my job. I'm almost done and I hear somebody yelling my name. And I look across the court and Jerry West is standing there and he goes, I found a photographer. Let's get that picture. So I go over, take this picture, Jerry West. Unfortunately, for years I didn't show it to anybody. I finally had it photoshopped because I had on the world's worst sport coat and tie in history. But he's the guy that after the game that waited, found the photographer because he wanted to, he told me to get a picture with me. Well, years later, when I was working in the Continental Basketball Association, I was working to get a player into the NBA from my team. I was a GM, and I called Bob Bass. And Bob said, you know who the guy you need to talk to is Jerry West. So I call his office and his longtime assistant, I can't think of her name. She goes, well, he's traveling. Give me your number, Jim, and I'll have him call you. So that night, this was pre-cell phone. I'd left my home number as well. I answered the phone at home and said, Jim, this is Jerry West. And I said, Mr. West, how are you? Appreciate you calling me. I understand you're traveling. I'm sorry to bother you. He goes, no, it's not a problem. Call me Jerry. And, you know, I said, well, Jerry, I said, I used to work for Bob Bass, work for the He said, you work for the Spurs? I said, yes, sir. I said, matter of fact, you and I had a picture made. And he went, we met in the press room of that old arena. He remembered it. And, you know, so that fascinated me. And the only other guy that really kind of remembered stuff like that was I had an encounter with Mac Brown when we were at the New Mexico Bowl. And he, you know, he remembered, well, and this is probably why he's great in living rooms recruiting players, because he remembered little things about the time we had met 10 years ago. And, you know, so I guess all of us have, you know, like you guys are broadcasters. I'm kind of eclectic when it comes to that kind of stuff. I'm not really starstruck, if you will, by anything or anybody, but those two guys, Arnold Palmer and Jerry West, were you know, were the guys that really kind of gave me that feeling of I'm not worthy.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for spending some time with us today. Jim, tell us about our social media presence where people can get in touch with Sports Martinis.
Oh, God, Andy, we're all over social media now.
You're a social media king.
But if you go to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, is there another one I'm not thinking of? And you just, you know, put in the search engine all those Sports Martinis, it'll pop up. And you can follow us. Oh, yeah, our YouTube channel is up and running. So we've got the two previous Zoom Sports Martinis up on the YouTube channel. This one will be up at some point. As well. You can email us if you want to at sportsmartinis@gmail.com. Don't forget to check out my blog at texassportsjournal.com. And Mike, where can people go to read your blog and check out all your stuff?
Yeah, a lot of stuff I post on Twitter, and then my blog I created. It's called Mike's Musings and Mumblings, just whatever random stuff came to my mind. So Mike's Musings and Mumblings at WordPress.com.
All right. You can find me at Andy Everett 760 and on Facebook. I'll eventually get with the program and do Instagram or something like that. But those are the only two places for now. Guys, thanks for spending some time with us. Great discussion. We'll do it again soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Terrific.
That's another edition of Sports Martinis. Join us next time right here on the iHeart platform.